You know, there's this place in downtown Chicago. At least it used to be there. I don't know if it's there anymore. You know how things change. And it had this archive. It's called the Gerber Hart Memorial Library, and it had a special archive. And in that special archive, they had every single edition, print edition, of the Gay Liberation Front's publications that came out during the '60s and '70s. And did you ever see it? Later '80s. Did you ever read through that stuff? I mean, they had it. They had every issue, every issue in there. See, it made a lot of sense at the time to understand how certain things had to do with each other. Like when they talk about things like crystal knocked and you got like the glass and the broken glass on the street. Okay, that has a certain meaning, but what does it mean? What does it mean? Is that there were community institutions, places where the community would go to meet, and that it was owned by the community, and there were people that would go there, and depending upon what they actually had, they would be able to provide for other people in the community. So if you owned your own house, that was different than if you were in a situation where for whatever reason you didn't own your own house. So you went to this institution or you went to this place, and then when you went to that place you met with people, and while you were engaged in a common activity within the confines, within the walls of that place, or in connection with the administration of the activities that came from that place, you got to know people. And it wasn't about who had what house at what size at what price point. But if for whatever reason somebody had a house at whatever size at whatever price point, and that gave them access to resources that then they could share with their community, including maybe helping somebody get a house or a temporary place to stay, or maybe they want to study, and so they are in network with other community institutions like that, and they're like, you know what, if you want to do this, we know somebody, there's a school there, you were able to get into that school there, they've got a room, you can stay in that room. The family then, the people in that community take care of that person, or you get together, you meet. Some people are living in a particular situation because they're working, and when they're working, they may have places where they live while they're working for a specific period of time, where they have meetings in those places. And this is the kind of understanding, right? So when somebody comes in and says, you're not allowed to go, you're not allowed to meet here. You're not allowed to meet here, you're not allowed to come here. And they break all the windows and they take all the furniture out. They burn the damn place. So you're not allowed to meet there. And then they start going house to house, right? Including if they start with the bigger houses, empty them out, and then they go to the houses you're in, and then they go to the places where you're there and tell you you can't go to work. That's what I'm talking about, right? This is part of what it's about. And so, if you have a situation like that, and then it's also coupled with somebody identifying you or marking you as if you have a disease, and then putting you into a context where they're trying to engineer your livelihood, including your mind, in order to address the factorizations around that disease, and especially if that is in a context of understanding that those institutions and that community was trying to figure out a way to engage peacefully and prosperously in a context where their actual access to social mobility or political power was limited because they didn't fit some other kind of specification. Wait a second, are we talking about demographic experience? I think we are, because that makes sense. So when you're trying to identify yourself, well, okay, gay liberation means what in what context? See, it's not a discontinuity, and it's not anything about a sort of cultural flip, and it's not treason, and it's not a question of challenges to one's loyalty. For you to then actually work with people that are within the community that are engaged in a course of law around specifically ownership of property, and how ownership of property, including shared ownership of property, intersects with capacity to assist somebody who might be in a state of incapacitation because they're in need of some kind of medical care. And so they need to be able to understand that they have people that they can rely on to make decisions on their behalf if they're not in a capacity to actually be able to make the decisions themselves. And then if something should happen to them and they die and they have cultural property, who gets it and who gets to do what with it, right? Because if you try to give the cultural property to another community for whom it's not relevant or that sees it as disease, what happens to it years down the road, right? I'm sorry. Are you concerned that I am not speaking about this from a demographically appropriate experience indicator index? Because I think that's really what the problem is, right? Okay, so these things aren't compatible and they're no longer available to me. I'm no longer allowed to know about this. I'm no longer allowed to be about this. Did you guys get rid of that archive? Did somebody go into the Gerber Hart Memorial Library downtown Chicago and take all of those papers off the shelves? Did they destroy them? Did they burn them? Did they shred them? Did they say it's intelligence? It's never fucking intelligence. It's an entire history of an entire community. You may not agree, but see, this is the problem. Even if you're talking about gay liberation, it was about ownership of the means of production and having sexuality be about something more than merely reproducing workers in a system that does not acknowledge the integrity of an individual and allowing for sexuality to be put into a context of commercialization wherein you can be alienated from your own sexual identity while it is ascribed as somebody else's propertied asset, right? I mean, that's my understanding. So when we start talking about marriage and we start talking about different kind of contract relationship and we stop talking about ownership of the means of production, unless we're talking about, the debt, what is that, double income, blah, 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 right? Disposable income. And then we start talking about adopting somebody else's surplus labor value in the form of children. Oh, it was a surplus. They didn't need it for themselves. Or, they couldn't afford it. So what? Did they go bankrupt and then their assets got seized and offloaded to somebody that, was able to pick it up on the discount market? See, that's where it goes different. See, that's not my demographic. That's not my experience. Does that make sense now? Are we more appropriately calibrated here? Do you understand? Because nothing you've said in the last 20 years, nothing you've said to me in the last 10 years really makes any fucking sense. Right?